quasi-judicial.
Oh, I agree.
And you kind of can figure out the definition from the last.
Speakers are on.
Subaqueous.
We're ready.
All right. Good evening. I'd like to call together to order the meeting of the city's advisory board for historic preservation, and the date is March 6th, starting at 6 o'clock. Diane, can you call the roll?
Ivan Heredia,
Here.
Chris Cabezas,
Here.
John Brewer is absent, Kristen Finn,
You're absent. Oh, John Brewer. I'm sorry. I'm like looking. I'm sorry. Here.
John Miller,
Here.
Peter Dwyer,
Here.
Jim Chard.
Here. Okay, we have the agenda before us, and are there any changes to the agenda, Michelle?
No.
And can I then have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Ivan Heredia,
Yes.
Chris Cabezas,
Yes.
John Brewer is absent, Kristen Finn,
Yes.
John Miller,
Yes.
Peter Dwyer,
Yes.
Jim Chard.
Yes. Next, we have the minutes. We have November 1st, December 6th, and in the last couple of times, we've kind of grouped them together in one motion. Any reason not to do that this time? Okay. Kristen, do you want to make a motion?
Sure. I make a motion to approve the minutes for November 1st, 2023 and December 6th, 2023.
Second.
Call the roll.
Ivan Heredia,
Yes.
Chris Cabezas,
Yes.
John Brewer is absent, Kristen Finn,
Yes.
John Miller,
Yes.
Peter Dwyer,
Yes.
Jim Chard.
Yes. So we next come to the swearing in of the public. Anybody who is going to speak, kindly hold up their hand. Follow Diane.
Please raise your right hand. By the authority vested in me, the notary of the state of Florida, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Okay. I think we only have one member of the public here tonight. Are there any comments from the public? All right. So, any presentations, Michelle?
No.
So we move on to the meat of the agenda. And I think we might at this point want to see if there has been any discussion with the applicant. Starting with Ivan.
None.
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 None. Quasi-judicial hearing before you start, Mr. Cavalli. This hearing shall be conducted in accordance with the City of Delray Beach quasi-judicial rules. The applicant and the city shall be permitted to present their case. The public shall be allowed to speak for 3 minutes each, or a maximum of 6 minutes if the person represents an organization or a group of people who are present but agree not to speak. The city commission or our board, staff, and the applicant may be allowed to cross-examine a witness. The city or the applicant may be allowed to offer rebuttal testimony. The decision to approve or deny an application or an appeal may not legally be made upon a person's personal views as to whether a project is a good project or not, nor may a decision be based on the numbers of citizens who support or oppose a particular project. The law requires that all decisions must be made on the basis of whether the project meets the requirements of law, the comprehensive plan, and the land development regulations. Mr. Cavelli.
Staff.
Yes. For the record, my name is Michelle Hewitt, planner, and I'd like to enter agenda item 8A, Sunday Village Building G, COA 2024-083, into the record for a COA and relocation. Mr. Machiavelli is here to present for the applicant.
Okay. Can you put the PowerPoint up? Okay. Good evening, Mike Cavelli, Cavelli Design, 1209 South Swinton Avenue. Tonight we're going to talk about Building G, which is in Block 61, for a COA and a relocation. These are the various blocks that make up the Sunday Village project. Tonight we're going to talk about Block 61, and particularly Building G, which is in the southeast corner of Block 61. This gives you a schematic from a portion of the site plan that shows the building in yellow is Building G, which is at the corner of Swinton Avenue and Southwest 1st Street. The topic tonight is to actually lift this house to place a foundation under it. Originally, in 2018, there was a COA issued to actually relocate this house along with all the other houses and line them up along Swinton Avenue while he built a parking garage. And then they were going to move them back on top of the parking garage. In 2020, when PEB took ownership of the property, we reevaluated that and said, we really don't want to have a house that's half on a garage and half on dirt, or half on a drainage structure and half on dirt. And we redesigned the whole project so that these were all on solid soil. And at that time, we changed the plan to where Building G in yellow and Cathcart in blue were not going to be moved at all. The four buildings in green have been picked up, all new foundations put in, and they are now permanently bolted to the new foundations without incident, I might say. You saw us here a few weeks ago with Cathcart because we discovered foundation and structural issues with it. I'm happy to say Cathcart has been lifted with no incident. So we're now starting the process to do that foundation and get it in. But as we discovered on every one of these structures when we lifted them, that there were problems with the structural members of the houses that you really couldn't see by just crawling under these things and looking. And so all of these are now going to be on solid foundations, bolted down, hardened for hurricanes, and so to not do that for Building G would probably be a lost opportunity. We don't have to do it, but it's the right thing to do. It's an expense to PEB to do this, but at the end of the day, after putting all the money into restoring the house, repurposing it, and doing all the things, if it gets blown off the foundation, then that's a loss. So we're here today voluntarily to ask that we can raise this. This is a historical picture of it. The house was built in 1938. I think this picture was sometime in the 60s. Here you see in the upper left-hand part of the picture the existing photograph of what it looks like today, and then at the last meeting we got approval for the restoration of the materials and colors, and so that gives you an idea what it will look like once restored. Here's another side of it that you can see the differences. And then here you see where the non-historical portion of the addition was removed from the building, exposing an old door and window that will be put back in its original condition. And then the north side with the chimney that will all be redone and maintained. The foundation will be a solid slab with a monolithic edge that will support the stem wall around the perimeter of it, just like we did on all the other projects. Here's an example of building C of how we did it, where you see the slab has been poured and the stem wall is being constructed, and then it's set down on that stem wall, and then bolts go through the sill plates from the inside into the foundation and down into the slab. So once that building is back on that foundation, it's not going to go anywhere. And then the building is ready for restoration, new windows, new doors, and all of the work that needs to be done to bring it up to date for repurposing of the structure. So this request is in conformity with land development regulations, the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan, the Delray Beach Historic Preservation Design Guidelines, and the Secretary of Interior Rehabilitation Standards. And I would really appreciate it if you would give us approval to let us do this. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Once again, for the record, I'm Michelle Hewitt, planner, and this is a COA for a relocation for Sunday Village Building G. Here we have an aerial of the Sunday Village site with the subject property circled in yellow. This is the furthest south historic structure located on Block 61. Some brief history. The structure was built in 1938. It's a one-story, 1,039 square foot wood frame minimal traditional architectural style building. It's currently addressed 44 South Swinton Avenue within Block 61 of the Sunday Village development, and it's situated at the corner of South Swinton Avenue and Southwest 1st Avenue. The structure was originally constructed as a residence and was approved for rehabilitation to commercial with the 2020 Class 3 site plan approval. Recently, with the January 2024 HPB approval, the use has been approved for restaurant. As previously mentioned, the structure was originally approved to be relocated or moved forward on the site, where with the 2022 approval, it was approved to remain as it exists on the site, along with the 2024 approval that just occurred in January. The overall request is for the temporary relocation of the existing structure vertically by 5 feet in place in order to install a new stem wall foundation for the structure to then be lowered back onto the new foundation. So here we have an existing image of the front or east elevation. This faces Swinton Avenue. Another angle of the existing east or front elevation. And this is the northeast corner of the Building G structure. And then we have the existing north or side interior elevation. This faces the historic structure closest to it. And then we have the existing west or rear elevation. This faces the interior of the site. Another existing west and rear /rear elevation. Then we have existing south/side street elevation. This faces southeast first on the south. And then here we have a site plan with the subject structure highlighted in yellow. Again, it's the furthest south of the historic structures. Here we have the proposed floor plan that was approved. And here we have the certified east elevation and proposed east elevation. Again, there's no modifications proposed to the elevations on the structure with this vertical relocation. And we have the, again, certified at the top, or the north elevation, and then the proposed at the bottom. And we have the west or the rear elevations here. And then the existing at the top of the south and the proposed at the bottom of the south as well. Here we have the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation, the 10 standards that we use to analyze all of our projects. And then the visual compatibility standards, again, used to analyze as well as for the board to use. And here we have a couple of staff report excerpts coming up. So here we have no concern regarding the proposed new foundation, as the proposal will ensure the structural stability of the building and its longevity. This is an excerpt from the visual compatibility section. There's no concern, again, with the use of a concrete foundation on this historic structure, as it is a ground level modification for the foundation. Here we have an excerpt from the relocation analysis. This will allow for a stronger foundation that will aid in structural stability of the subject structure. It's not anticipated to have a negative effect on the surrounding building/site, as it is to be located in its original position/siting. Again, this is temporary and is considered appropriate, as no change to the existing location is proposed. And then here we have an excerpt from the architectural elevations section. Again, it's not expected to cause any harm with regards to the nature of the local environment, nor its evolved environment to depreciate in value. Here are the findings for LDR section 2412. And that concludes my presentation.
Any comment from the public? Any rebuttal of staff?
None.
None from staff.
None? Okay. Who would like to start the discussion?
I mean, I'm all for it. You know, nothing that was not approved before in any of the other ones. I just have a quick question. Are there any other ones coming down the pike?
No.
It's been a string of these.
We've actually already moved building D, which is the only other one that is now at the south end of Sunday House, and that also has gone without any issue. So this would be the last of the structures, which were decided it was the right thing to do rather than just leave it sit on the ground on the current foundation.
Full speed ahead then.
Yeah.
Okay.
I support this.
What's going to happen to the interior of the structure? Is it currently 2x4 framing?
The framing is interesting in some of these houses. Like in Cathcart, they actually had a 2x4 that was turned sideways and then tongue and groove on each side of it. For the most part, the insides, at least the exterior walls, need to be stripped because we're actually drilling through the sill plates,
Right.
and that gets bolted down through the concrete block into the slab to secure it. So for the most part, the interiors are basically gutted and completely redone.
Right. So you'll probably add 2x6s and
Whatever structural means have to be done in order to remember we're changing the occupancy of
Right.
it as well, and so part of the foundation work actually really assists in the live load situation with the floors and all that, so that as a commercial building,
So you have
the
additional loads.
repurposing of it is also much safer because you have a good solid foundation and a much more secure floor in the building that can be done while the building is up in the air.
I got a question
That's good.
related to that. Then if you got anything else?
no, I'm good.
All right.
Thank you.
So this is 1,000 square foot, so it's very small.
Yeah.
And these are repurposed to restaurant use. So that means commercial kitchen, bathrooms, the whole thing. Are you going to wait till these are leased out or whatever to then do that interior improvement
Yes.
based on whatever the
Yes.
requirements of whoever's moving in there?
Yes, the goal is to get this on a solid foundation so that we start with that part of it where all of the structural members in the floor are beefed up so that they meet the commercial live load requirements, and then get the exterior of them renovated with windows, doors, impact windows and doors, the new roofs and all of that. And then as leasing occurs, then we would go from there. It doesn't necessarily mean, even though we've said these are all classified for restaurant, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a bona fide restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a coffee shop that serves certain kinds of food. It can be a number of different uses.
Mm-hmm.
The only building that is really truly a restaurant is building B and F to the north of this. because B is a small building that would become the kitchen, and F would be the actual dining area. So combining those buildings, do that. 1,000 square feet, it's really going to be difficult to do a kitchen and a dining area.
Yeah.
So we feel they're probably going to be like specialty type restaurants, if you want to call it a restaurant.
Yeah, okay. And then everything is lifted, the floors are lifted, so the plumbing and the
Right.
gas or whatever is going in is easy to do after the fact.
And the other thing that's really nice about doing it this way, we have a solid concrete slab underneath that building now, that it's bolted to that stem wall. So you don't have the moisture and the dirt and all of the other things that happen under that building. So if we have a really bad storm where you had like a flooding condition, you can actually go in and clean that all out and not have those moisture issues. It solves a lot of things structurally for the building in the long term.
Okay, great.
May I?
Michelle, you have something?
Yeah.
I'd like to hear from you.
So we've talked with the applicant and inspected the site after all of the moves happened. We went out and checked. So they have, and I think I've testified before to this or noted on record, that they have enclosed any holes on the exterior of the building. They've sealed it so that there would be no damage while they were sitting and waiting for the renovations to occur. But as far as Pete, Mr. Dwyer, you asked about framing. If from what the plan has been thus far, is these aren't to be reframed on the entire structure, because that could potentially lean into reconstruction. Repairs, if necessary, they'll coordinate with us as they go. But they're in fairly good shape. We've inspected them. Like I said, we're not anticipating anything like that. What they're doing would primarily be how the building would be anchored, like Mike said.
And if I
with the
may, we
new-
are going to hurricane clip the
Right.
insides of it as well.
Well, there are structural plans attached,
Yeah.
and they indicate some bracing and some different things
Right.
that they look like permanent modifications to the
Yeah.
roof system.
Yeah, they're
So-
going to brace everything, hurricane clip all the members together, so they will definitely be hardened for hurricane.
And then you can actually see the foundation under the building. So the ones that have already had this done, I've
Yeah.
gone, looked, and photographed. So there's holes where you can access the underneath, and the solid foundation is there with all of the vent covers and the vent openings.
Which
and
is
the house
important.
sits
That
on
looks
it.
good.
It's big enough for you to crawl under it, but not sit under it.
Not where you want to really go hang out.
No. So are you raising the finished floor?
We're keeping the finished floor per the approved plans. It's not any kind of big change with it. No.
Sounds good.
Okay, Ivan?
I just have one question. This is great. My question is, how do you get handicap accessibility up to these structures?
I think you were absent at the last meeting when we got all of the decking and patios and everything approved. All of those surrounding decks and patios will have accessibility items provided so that you can get in and out of the buildings. So they will be handicap accessible.
Great, thank you.
I've got a couple.
Mm-hmm.
I've walked that property and I know a lot of it is sand. So how do you really secure a slab down? Are there piers underneath of some sort?
The purpose of doing the big slab is just for that reason. It's a spread footing that spreads the load across that soil that has a bearing capacity, a certain bearing capacity, but it also adds to a lot of weight and for uplift for wind and those kind of loads. So if we were just going to go in and do a foundation for a stem wall, it would be a very different situation. But by doing a slab with a spread footing and a thickened monolithic edge all around it, anchors that in that soil so that you don't have any kind of an issue with shifting or sinking or structural issues like that over the long term.
So the slab is sufficient?
Yes, the slab is really the critical part of really solidifying that
Okay.
foundation.
Is there any issue when you lift the building in terms of structural integrity? I remember with the Cathcart House, a lot of bracing had to be put in place. And I'm guessing there would be lifting, I know you're not moving it, but lifting it 5 feet would have certain stresses and strains.
This is kind of similar to the other 4 buildings that you saw in the green, where as a single structure they can actually run all the girders underneath the building, so it sits on those. Cathcart's a special issue because Cathcart is kind of lifted from the 2nd floor, and the 1st floor is kind of hanging. They took all the windows out and ran girders through the windows in the 1st floor. Because the bottom structure of the building was in such bad condition that they didn't want to count on that to support the porches on the upper floors. Because if you remember, the 4x4 columns that came down that supported the porches and the roof structure were in a concrete porch that had to be jackhammered out. Mm-hmm. So in order to do that and actually lift that structure, it's a completely different situation with Cathcart. This is standard of what we did with A, C, F, B, and D, where you're just putting the girders underneath and just lifting it up. So this is not a real tenuous situation in terms of lifting this building.
I know in here it talks about damage during relocation. Who actually determines whether there's been damage and how that is really evaluated?
So the requirements by code, if there is anything that occurs on site, puts the responsibility on the applicant to call the city, the building official, and historic staff within 24 hours of such occurrence. And then we go out and inspect and see what the condition is. Is it repairable? Is it not repairable? Do we need to institute the bond that's been put in place? So the applicant has the responsibility. Once the move is fully complete and they're ready for inspection, we go out and inspect at that time if there's been no incident. So it would be uncovered during either time, but their team has engaged structural engineers, the building mover, plus the structural engineer, is his name Yusuf, is that right? Who I've spoken to and talked about his experience, making sure he had experience in historic. So I feel very confident that if anything were to go wrong, it would be unforeseen because they have prepared thus far, which is why we have the requirements we have in the code.
I just always had this vision of that building on Swinton that collapsed.
Well, it's a good question.
It's a good question.
Some of, I've been asked the question before. That is why we have the code requirements in place that we have in place, was that instance that you're talking about, the building on Swinton. So it was 2015 that the code was revised to add additional requirements with responsibilities that are the applicant and responsibilities that are the city's, to ensure the longevity and protection of these through any move. Now, I think the code kind of thought the moves were happening horizontally and moving around. They don't actually say, the code doesn't say that it's a horizontal or vertical move, but we apply this to any move. So if you're shifting vertically or horizontally, the requirements are all the same.
If I may add to that, we moved one building down First Avenue to south of Cathcart, or south of Sunday House, and the other 4 that we moved to the west and then back to the east, we're 5 for 5 with no incident. So we have a little bit of history. We have Cathcart to go and this one to go. So we're taking all kinds of care to preserve these. We understand the value of them, and the long-term value it brings to the project as well.
Do you have a target date for completion, not of just Block 61, but Sunday renovation and as well, or?
We are
I'm assuming 70 and 69 are going to take
for
longer.
61. We're saying October this year.
Wow.
So we're really moving, give or take a month or so maybe. But we are putting a very comprehensive package together for Sunday that we'll be bringing in shortly. And so I know we did some approvals for some renovations of the exterior and deletion of some non-historical things. But we've taken a more comprehensive look at the entire site, and we'll be bringing that into you shortly.
All right. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the Certificate of Appropriateness and Relocation 2024-083 for the property located at 44 South Swinton Avenue, Building G, Sunday Village, Old School Square Historic District, by finding that the request and approval thereof is consistent with the comprehensive plan and meets the criteria set forth in the land development regulations.
Second.
Call the roll.
Ivan Heredia,
Yes.
Chris Cabezas,
Yes.
John Brewer is absent, Kristen Finn,
Yes.
John Miller,
Yes.
Peter Dwyer,
Yes.
Jim Chard.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Time to lift another house. It's the last one, I promise, on this block.
Yes.
Hopefully we can get some more.
Enjoy your
Thank
early
you. Hopefully.
evening. Nice for them to get out of here early, as opposed to these last few meetings.
Michelle, do you have
Okay.
anything to talk to us about?
So last night, the city commission had a few items on the agenda regarding historic preservation. One were the appeals related to Magnolia Place, and the commission approved the appeals. So they approved the site plan and the plat by a vote of 3-2. So that essentially HPB's denial was overturned. And then there have also been, so we emailed the board and let you know that the Frog Alley Historic Resource Survey was on the schedule for the workshop on February 20th. So we gave an update to the commission on the progress of that and received direction to move forward with that as a priority. So that was good news. As part of the Frog Alley Historic Resource Survey, there was a resolution on the books that was uncovered for our purposes. I understand it's been uncovered before, so it's not the first time we've learned about it or that people have learned about it. It's the first time I learned. Relating to segregation within the city of Delray Beach. So the resolution was from 1935 and defined an area for the black race, people of the black race, where they were able to own property and live, and then the area for the white race where they were going to own property, occupy property, and essentially that was all of the city, including the area for the black community. It also had other restrictions within that resolution. So during that meeting, the resolution was discussed, and the commission had given us direction to remove the resolution from the books. So staff prepared and began researching to have it on for last night. Thankfully, it was changed to a discussion rather than an action because there were members of the community that had thoughts and opinions and wanted to be part of the process, as they should. So we are going to move forward with additional research. The Historical Society had some documentation that they shared relating to policing districts. There's more than the one resolution. So we will be working with the community and defining what they would like to see happen. Members of the Black community so that there's ownership over this effort. So it was, I think, a really, if you can go back and listen to February 20th and last night, I would listen to public comment at the beginning of last night's commission meeting. There were some very important comments made by the public, and then listen to the discussion. I believe it was item 7C. So it's going to be ongoing, and I wanted to keep the board apprised of the progress of that. I don't know if all of you had heard about it. I think it's disappointing to hear, obviously, that that's still on the books, but we're researching to see if that's the case, and if it is, what should the next steps be? What the community offered from their perspective, not everyone had the same opinion in who we've talked with and what we've heard from last night, but that doesn't diminish the effort. And so I think there's real focus on is how we move forward towards equity and unity with what this resolution ordinance mean. So please go back and listen to the discussion. February 20th is a workshop. On the 20th, we also discussed incentives for the Atlantic Avenue Historic District. The direction from the commission was wait until the new commission is seated before any decisions are made. So hopefully that'll be something we come back to the new commission with shortly after they're put in place, in the early spring. I think that's it. I know we have on our docket of to-dos, I think that we said we were going to wait until after the election. More topics relating to landscape updates for the board to discuss. I know that you all have to decide if there's a consensus to change any direction that's been made thus far. So that's what I have for you, and I don't know if you have anything for me.
I have.
That's a surprise.
Yeah. So I have some thoughts. So I was at both of the meetings. I thought the presentations for Frog Alley and Atlantic were good. I'm disappointed that they're kind of kicking the can, back to the beginning. But that's the way it is. I was more concerned about last night, and I would encourage the board, no matter how you voted on the last one, to go back and look at the video from last night's discussion of the appeal. I would suggest to Anthea, and maybe you could pass this along, that new commissioners and some existing ones could use some training on historic guidelines, because the appeal came, some commissioners weren't aware that we don't just make recommendations. They assume that we just made a recommendation and then City Commission gets the yay or nay it. Well, that's not the case on COAs. That was the case on the plat. But so they had the process wrong. They, in my opinion, completely ignored the quasi-judicial rules, which says you have to follow the LDRs and it doesn't matter your personal opinion on a project. Well, they had their personal opinion on the project and they ignore the LDRs in terms of the lot width, which is black and white, the lot coverage, which is black and white. Those are hard measurements. Setbacks are hard measurements. And then the visual compatibility standards are somewhat subjective, but those were ignored as well. So I know that that's not you. You did what you could do. But I think some training on behalf of P&Z to the new commissioners would be helpful. They referenced how many people supported and wrote letters, even though some people did say, well, we don't make decisions on how many people support, but look how many people supported it. So I was a little bit frustrated, and I certainly couldn't refute all of that in 3 minutes, although I gave it my best shot. And then there was a comment by one of the commissioners about this, addressing a comment I had made about chipping away at the historic districts. and this is not chipping away in that sense. And he's like, well, this is not chipping away. It's still in a historic district. And technically it is still in a historic district. However, if inappropriate infill comes into a historic district, then any future development in historic districts, can be based on that. Whether, we call it a precedent or not, people are going to use that as a standard to then go forward. So it is chipping away at a historic district. And so my thoughts are, when the commission does get seated, and I know they're going to have a lot of priorities, and they certainly don't just think about historic preservation issues, but, an hour of training here or there, or allowing us to sit down with them would be helpful. So, getting that on the record.
I think too that there's importance in the actions that you all have available to you as a board. So you can approve, deny, or continue with direction. Continue with direction provides the applicant your direction on how you feel a project could meet the code requirements or come closer to meeting the code requirements. I know, if I remember correctly,
That project, they didn't want us to continue with direction. They wanted
but
either
they don't get
approval
to
or denial.
decide.
Oh, because I thought.
Yeah, if we
No,
were
I-
to, right.
So they have a due process right to their application, and my direction to the board would be, if they say we are not changing anything and you need to vote on our application, that the board does need to vote, yes or no. So
That's what they did.
yes, if I believe my recollection is the same as
Right.
Board Member
Yep.
Fenn, that the discussion was
they
had
did,
and the
yeah.
opportunity granted, and they decided we're making no
Iliopoulos
changes.
said, we want you to say yay or nay.
They did.
Right.
I'm just still reminding you
Right.
of a process that's in
Right.
place. I have a lot of thoughts that I don't really feel comfortable saying on the record. Unfortunately, the board's concerns were not the same as the city commission's concerns. So I will share this with our director. I'll share it with, I'm sure William will as well, the city attorney, and see if there's an opportunity for an education or informational session, perhaps, is probably a better way to frame it.
One of the statements that was made last night was that they had taken a lot of direction, I guess mainly from the staff, they said HPB, in the presentation that they made last night. Are you aware of any changes from what we saw?
No, what they were talking about was the process between the review staff does prior to them getting to this board. There was a lot that went on behind the scenes about the project. So,
Well, I have to say on record, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to be here last night. I was in Arizona, so I wanted to be here. I was at the Frog Alley presentation workshop, and you guys did a great job on all of that.
Thanks.
And with the historic, I, along with John, was upset during that commission meeting that action wasn't taken about the Atlantic Historic District, but what are you going to do?
They're the commission. Ivan?
Nothing to add.
Nothing for me.
No, I don't have anything. Thank you.
I'd like to ask a little bit about Frog Alley. I'm kind of intrigued by the fact that we have a community that really wants historic designation, or at least the appearance of it. And also concerned that they were quote unquote ignored in the Atlantic Avenue Historic District. And in addition, believe that part of the reason they aren't historic is that because the CRA, in efforts to remove blight, removed a number of the historic, or what would have been considered contributing buildings. And there was an expression that they were sort of given second place or third place behind downtown, and that was where the emphasis had gone. And my only question is, when we have we have so much pushback in terms of historic preservation. Here we have a community that's asking for it, and for what are probably very good reasons, it has been delayed. And my question is, given that receptivity, what can we do, either particularly as the Historic Preservation Board, to prioritize, accelerate that process? Because as we all know, the contributing buildings in that neighborhood are disappearing at a rapid rate.
So first, I want to make sure that we all have an opportunity to go back and watch my presentation on Frog Alley, if you haven't already. That is not what happened with the Frog Alley effort. There was no reprioritization that occurred. Frog Alley began and stopped because the consultant that was hired closed their planning practice. And at that point, we're demanding to get paid. The document that was completed was substandard. It was not of a quality that, no matter what community you are, but in my opinion, especially the Black community, I am not going to bring a resource survey forward that's substandard. So we had to go into negotiations with the consultant and come up with a fee that we would pay. And we requested authorship rights over the resolution or the resource survey so that we could bring a resolution forward. Were there two efforts occurring at the same time? Yes. Atlantic Avenue then picked up and began coming down the pike. Ignoring the West Atlantic Avenue as part of the Atlantic Avenue Resource Survey is not what happened. The Atlantic Avenue Resource Survey was a study from I-95 to A1A. There was one resource available between Southwest Northwest 1st Avenue and I-95. One building that could be designated. We met with the owner of that building and tried to encourage that owner to designate. We can't require him to do that. We gave him the information with his team of people. So it feels counterintuitive to me, for all of the work that I've put into these efforts over the last few years, to hear that narrative, because it's not accurate. Frog Alley needs to move forward, and while there have been some priority shifts because we were negotiating and coming up with a plan and then focused on Atlantic Avenue and then running Sunday Village through the process for the last 4 years, have we been busy? Yes. But I don't agree that there was any kind of ignoring of the West Atlantic community as part of the Atlantic Avenue effort. To the contrary, I think that discussions that have occurred internally, could there be opportunity for commemorative projects in the area? And then hearing the public speak last night, that's their thought too, and they're working along that as well. Also, Frog Alley, the community, have not directly come to the city and said, we want to be a historic district. So part of this effort, once we roll out and come through with that effort, is we need to talk with the community and see what do they want. Because the folks that have asked for Frog Alley to be designated, while there are some people who are from or were living in Frog Alley, they are not a representation of the whole community. So I definitely think that there are some steps that have to continue to happen. Have buildings been demolished along West Atlantic Avenue? Yes. I don't think any one of us has control over that history that happened. What we can do is continue to focus on our historic districts and our historic properties. So I'm glad to hear the commission prioritize Frog Alley, but I think that Frog Alley is a priority. Atlantic Avenue is a priority. We've got the golf course as a priority. We have the cemetery, which is rolling along. So we have a lot of priorities and things. I don't think one takes precedent over the other. And I don't mean to be stern, but I've just heard this a lot, and this is kind of an opportunity for me to say something on the record, because I have to be cautious in how I say things at the commission level. But I can speak freely with my board here, with all of you as the Historic Preservation Board. So we set the record and understand how we're moving forward.
I didn't mean that to sound as a criticism, and I apologize if it sounded that way. I was more talking about the positive spirit in the community toward having historical designation and capitalizing on that, and as a way to expedite a process that has taken a long time for whatever reason. And in terms of the memorialization, I know a number of people liked your idea of spirit houses. Those buildings are gone, but not forgotten, and they played a role in our society and history. And even if that isn't made a historic district, we could certainly be, as a historic board, encouraging that kind of activity.
And will be opportunities for review and analysis to happen as if a historic district, if context doesn't exist for a historic district, could there be a conservation district? What's the difference if you don't know? Conservation still has some rules and requirements that are geared towards preserving what the community might have looked like, and they're typically controls that are more applicable to new construction, where historic preservation has controls on existing structures, new structures, in a different frame, basically. So the report will include both options. There's a commercial area that could potentially be designated a residential area, but the amount of structures that exist are so small that they're very compact areas that would potentially be designated as conservation or historic.
I've had some conversations with people who are interested in this area as well, and in my impression that it's more about the recognition of the area, communicating the history of the area, the story of the area, whether it be through plaques or, like you said, a conservation district. I don't think a lot of people that live over there right now understand what would be coming down the pike if it was truly designated a historic district. But the whole history and story behind it is what really needs to be told, and whether that is a memorial, a plaque, a statue, whatever it is, I think that just designating a district doesn't mean that anybody's going to learn the history of it if there's no other physical manifestation of that.
It's very true.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And I think too that there are, as we communicate with the public, I'm not sure that the public, the people who own property and live in this neighborhood, like you say, will understand the review process that will apply. So if we go back to what the task force said when they were originally meeting in 2015, 16, 17, they acknowledged and included as part of this effort that there would have to be some level of incentive. And one of the first asks of the task force of the commission was to put together a grant program. Well, the commission did commit funds, $10,000 years ago, and we got it a couple more times, but we weren't able to use it because Frog Alley wasn't in place yet. And so we wanted that grant program to really serve as an incentive for Frog Alley. And, again, that's a whole nother process. We would have to write how that works, who manages it, what are the application requirements, are they micro grants, or, what is it? But there has to be some level of, I think, benefit to the community. And we heard from an owner yesterday, I think it was, who owns property on Swinton, asking about what kind of grants are available for maintenance type repairs. And, there aren't much, and I don't know that the CRA grants would apply for residential, but that's where we direct them, is just talk with the CRA. So we're on the path towards making these projects come to light. And you all are going to be able to be involved in seeing that happen.
I don't mean to drag out the conversation, but it would just seem to me that there are tools that could be used, and you'll probably, or William will correct me on this one, but there are certain buildings in Northwest Southwest, like the old packing plant, that we all know have historical value to them and are to some degree at risk. Isn't there some mechanism like a right of first refusal that the city could somehow own or acquire, that those buildings, if somebody came in that was going to tear them down and just replace them with a modern building, that the city would own a right of first refusal.
I don't know that coming through with government acquisition of property in the black neighborhood is the right approach. That building's already in the West Settlers Historic District as a contributor, so it has protections for demolition. It has maintenance requirements that would thwart demolition by neglect. So there are things already in place protecting that particular structure and many others in the West Settlers Historic District. There haven't been a lot of demolitions that have occurred since the Historic District was put in place in '97. A lot of the demolitions occurred prior to. I don't know. I think that question, Mr. Chard, would be a question for the black community. Would that be something that they would want to see?
Yeah.
I mean, that is, if you go and look at the map of ownership in the Northwest, Southwest communities, there's already a lot of property owned by government or quasi-government agencies.
Yeah, I was going to say that would be less intrusive than, say, the CRA acquiring the property. Anyway, we probably talked it too much. Anything else anybody has?
One question about the railroad house that's getting built next to the highway. Any word on what's happening there?
So that's a reconstruction, historic reconstruction that occurred after a fire that was due to arson. And that should be coming open, ribbon cutting, I'm assuming soon. That is the Seaboard Airline Railway Station. It's on the local and national register of historic places. So we're waiting to see if we've been, keeping in touch with Public Works to see how far along they are. And they were shooting for January 1, and we're a little behind that. So I think it's very soon.
What's the use going to be?
So as I understood, and I think it's still the case, but I am not the expert or the person who is saying what the use is. But I understood that there were going to be city facilities there, city department.
Probably HR.
Okay. I think HR should be in this building personally. But anyway,
Michelle, that's the one where the landscape plan came before us.
Yeah.
The revised landscape plan.
Yes. If it is HR, I think the other portion of that would be that the clinic would be there with it,
Yeah.
which would make sense
That's
for
alright.
new applicants coming to the city.
Motion to close the proceedings. This may or may not be my last night here.
Ah,
So,
good luck to you.
good luck.
thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
What do you think turnout's going to be this time?
Well, I was just gonna say, for all of those who were doing spring break, vote early.